Hello and welcome back to my basement. This is Jeremiah. I just wanted to go over a couple of recent comments I had and, offer some insight, see if we find this interesting. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first one. So this gentleman says CCNP exam sucks. 105 questions in 120 minutes. I didn't even have time to read through the questions, scenario, output, answers. The CCNP tests how quickly you can read just as much as it does your knowledge of Cisco stuff. I won't be going for it again unless an employer wants to pay for it. The exam cemented my notion that Cisco sucks, although it has a very high opinion of itself. Can't use most of their protocols anyway because most companies aren't 100% Cisco. All right, so this I found this comment to be really fascinating. And listen, uh, Katerina Guerra. So maybe it's not a guy, maybe it's a woman. Katerina. I don't know. Um, Listen, I'm not trying to be a jerk to you, but I love these types of attitudes, honestly. And the people watching this should love this type of stuff too, because here's someone you don't have to compete with. They're going to make sure that they never advance in their career. And so it's one less person that you have to compete with in the job market. Um, let's go through this, a little bit. 105 questions in 120 minutes. Yeah, that's tough. And there's a reason that Cisco exams are tough. It's because they're respected. I remember back in the day, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the sort of certification stuff was really kind of coming into its place, and Microsoft certifications and even Cisco certifications, their first couple iterations, there were plenty of people out there who we used to call them paper tigers. They could memorize test questions, go take an exam, and pass it, and they'd have the cert, and they had zero real knowledge. They couldn't do anything. And they brought down the value of the certification so that when I, who worked hard for my certs, went to apply, the employer might be like, well, okay, you got a CCNP and a CCDP and a CCSP. Like, well, that doesn't really mean too much. Everybody has those certs. Cisco kind of realized this pretty early on, and they ratcheted up the difficulty on their exams early, and they ratcheted up hard, and they've kind of kept it there. Now there are still plenty of people that can, fake their way through some of the exams, which is why, one of the reasons why I'm working toward my CCIE. I haven't been working toward it for a few months because of the kid, but just starting to get back into it. Because you can't fake it. You just cannot fake it. So, yes, it is very difficult. And yeah, it does test your ability to read just as much, because here's the thing. When you're looking at a question, your brain should be trained to pick out the salient points. What are the key points here that are important to what I'm trying to accomplish? When you're looking at output, you should know those outputs. You should know that 80% of it doesn't affect you. You only need these couple bits of information, and you should be able to hone in on that immediately. And why should you know that? Because they're trying to trick you and make it hard just because they think they're so great? No, it's because when stuff breaks in the real world and you're the gal who's going to get called in the middle of the night, and management's breathing down your neck, or you have a huge multi-million dollar. I have had an outage. I have personally worked on outages that lasted minutes, that cost millions of dollars. So you better believe it that you need to be able to find the problem and fix it quick. Sometimes that's just, putting a Band-Aid on until we can reconvene in the morning and really go through it and figure out what happened, but you need to be able to find the problem and fix it quick. So, when this person says it's a lot to read and a lot to get through, and they're testing your ability to read, yeah, that's part of it. That really is part of it, and that should be part of it. Um, I'm not going to test again until an employer wants to pay for it. Well, here's the thing. I have had employers pay for some of my training, but one of the things that I have done consistently through my career is I always pay for my own training as much as I can. If it's anything that I want, I pay for it. Why do I pay for it? Because I don't want to be trapped. And a lot of employers will do this thing where they say, yes, we'll send you to this training, or we'll pay for you to get the certification. But if you don't, if you leave the company within a year or 3 years, you have to pay us back. And that's bullshit. I don't ever want to feel beholden to a company. We've talked about this before, but a company is not beholden to you in any way. They will tell you time and time and time again how important it is for you to be loyal to them, how important it is for you to sacrifice for them. But when the roles are reversed, when it's time for them to sacrifice, they're not going to tell the shareholders, hey, you know what, our profits are going to be lower this year, or we're going to take a hit this fiscal quarter because, times are tough, but we don't want to lay any of our people off. They're good people. They've stuck with us when times were tough, and so we're going to do right by them. So, Mr. Shareholder, Mrs. Shareholder, you're not going to see any return on your investment this quarter or this year. That's never going to happen, right? When the shit hits the fan, all that talk about loyalty and sacrifice, it goes up in smoke, and they will lay you off. They will furlough you, or at early retirement or whatever, and they won't blink an eye about it. So never. This is your career. It's not their career. It's your career. And I realize that's a big ask for a lot of people. Spending that kind of money is a big ask because it can cost thousands of dollars to get a certification. 9 times out of 10, you're going to get that money back if you've invested wisely in yourself. So, yeah, it's just, I love everything about this. It's like, why should I work hard and sacrifice for my career? My company should do it for me. Good luck. Good luck. See how that pays off for you in the long term. And I'm sure this person, if they see this video, they're going to write back and be like, you don't know, I make tons of money and I'm super successful and fuck you. So, okay, good, cool. You're the exception then, not the rule. This exam cemented my notion that Cisco sucks, although it has a very high opinion of itself. Listen, Cisco, they probably do have a very high opinion of themselves. They have been knocked down a few pegs in the past few years. They are still the biggest when it comes to networking equipment. But the industry took this huge jog in a different direction that they weren't prepared for. They're still playing catch up. But what you need to understand is that they're still the biggest. They might not be 80, 90% market share anymore, but they're still the biggest. The vast majority of the stuff that exists in networking, they either invented it or they had a significant role in inventing it. So when you're learning Cisco, you are learning networking in general. Almost everything you learn, you can take to, there's some exceptions. We'll get to that in a second. And then the other thing is they have one of the best certification systems out there. It's been in place now for 20 plus years, maybe 30 years. And so, yeah, like they have the tests and the exams and the books and the training material, like it's out there more than just about anything else. So you can use Cisco even if you're not necessarily want to work with Cisco because their training material is so good. And the vast majority of it you can take with you to other vendors. So yeah, they do have a high opinion of themselves, and they're kind of learning the lesson the hard way that they need to be more agile. Also keep in mind, while they have been hurt the past few, and their profits are down, they're not losing money, their profits are down, they still have tens of billions of dollars in the bank, right? They have like government level money just on hand. They in the bank, just that they can tens of billions of dollars. Just, and our brains don't always comprehend like just how much money that is. They're going to be okay for a while, and there's a very good chance that they're going to come back to being, if not on top, they're going to stay one of the top 3 for years to come. And then finally, you can't use most of their protocols anyway because most companies aren't 100% Cisco. No, that's just not true. That's just not true. Most Cisco, with a couple of exceptions, they are industry standard, OSPF, BGP, spanning tree. Cisco does have for many protocols. They do have their own version of it, but with the exception of EIGRP, you see more and more they don't really recommend using those protocols because it's just the real world. The real world is not, most networks are not all Cisco, and so you can't use those protocols. Their protocols tend to be easier, more robust, generally. So they do teach them, and they're worth learning. And you can oftentimes run their protocols, in a branch office where it's, smaller and it's easier to just implement, their protocols, but then talk a standardized protocol to the rest of the network. So, that's all the design stuff. But this idea that most of their protocols you can't use, that just illustrates you don't actually, if you think that, if this person genuinely believes that, then they weren't prepared to take this test because they would know that that's just not true. So, all right, so that's that one. Let's go on to the next one. I apologize. I am I'm sick. Under the weather. I don't know why we always shy away from just being honest, but I'm sick. I don't feel well. I haven't been sleeping well, and but I just thought I'd do this anyway. So this is talking about my Linux Plus video. Hey, this is an awesome video. I'm currently working on trying to get my A+. Then after that, I'll work on Network Plus, Linux Plus, LIPC1. I want to become Red Hat certified. Do you recommend this, or should I skip Network Plus? But honestly, I wouldn't mind certifying in cloud or AWS. Whoa, partner. Slow your roll, my friend. Let's look at this let's take a big step back, and we'll take a big shift to the left and look at this from a different perspective. Let's imagine that you're a young person, okay? You're just getting out of high school, and you're looking for a job. And the fact that you have worked at McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's, is that really going to impress an employer? If you go to an employer, say at a factory, and you say, when they say, well, what kind of job? You're pretty young, so obviously you don't have a lot of job experience. But what kind of job experience do you have? And you say, well, I've worked at McDonald's, and I've worked at Wendy's, and I've worked at Burger King. 3 entry-level jobs. Is that any more impressive than just saying, well, I worked at McDonald's for 2 years? No, it's not more impressive. Maybe the tiniest bit. It shows that you can learn different whatever it's called, different ways of doing things. But, I don't know. I don't think that's really going to impress anybody, the fact that you've worked at multiple entry-level jobs. And it's the same thing with this here. A+ prepares you for an entry-level job. Network Plus prepares you for an entry-level job. Linux Plus prepares you for an entry-level job. LIPC1, why would you get that and Linux Plus? They're essentially the same thing. So, and then you want to do Red Hat and you want to do AWS. Like, I understand, when you're early in your IT career, it's kind of hard to know where you want to go. But I would only get 1 or 2 entry-level certifications, and then you gotta move up. You gotta show people that you have the ability to learn and grow. If you keep doing this easy stuff, and it's a challenge, but in the world of IT, this is the easy stuff. If you have 5 easy things on your resume, I'm not impressed. And I'm not saying that to be critical of Alan here. I'm just I'm trying to give some real-world advice here. Because a lot of people do that because they know the certifications look good, and they know that, hey, I could probably spend a couple months on each of these and pass that test, and I'm going to look really good because I have all these certs. But when the hiring manager looks at your resume and they just see all these entry-level certifications with no or very little experience, they're not going to be impressed. So, I would figure out where you want to work. You want to work in cloud or AWS? Then take a look at the AWS certs. Like, there's AWS certs, or Google has Google Cloud certs. Microsoft has Azure certs. Like, I got a buddy of mine who works with Azure and AWS. He makes good money with no certs just because he has experience, man. Like, there's good jobs to be had in the cloud. There's no question about that. But you can't always know exactly where you want to go, but sometimes you got to take a risk. Sometimes you got to say, okay, I'm going to get my A+, and then I'm going to get work on my CCNA. That looks a lot better on a resume than all these entry-level certs. So, yeah, I would not do this. In fact, to me personally, if I was looking at hiring, this tells me there's something wrong here. Why are you getting all these certs? Why are you wasting your time on this, on these low-level certs? Now, it's different if you have higher-level certs and you want to say, listen, I can do this one thing really well at an advanced level, and I also can do all these other things at an entry level. So I got one big cert and then several small ones that show that I have a broad scope of knowledge, but also deep in one or two areas. Then it looks better. But if it's all just broad and very shallow, that doesn't look particularly good for you. Okay. Last one here. This is also about my Linux Plus video. LFS, Linux from scratch for anyone reading. That's how you learn Linux through and through. It's not easy, but when done, you know the entire system works. So I appreciate this comment, but I'm going to be honest and say this is what I hate about Linux. The idea that to learn, so this is he's commenting on a video about Linux Plus. He's commenting on a video about becoming an entry-level Linux administrator, someone who just knows the basics of Linux. And his solution is to build your kernel from the source code and build the entire system from the ground up. With, I don't even understand half of what would go into that. Like I did look at it a little bit. It is incredibly complicated, and it is not for the average person. And this is right here. This is what I hate about Linux, is Linux has this really interesting effect on people. All of us, I think, how do I put this? So you watch these movies from the 80s, right? Or you read stories about stuff coming out of Berkeley in the 70s, like in the real world. And what is it? It's dudes on keyboards doing really cool stuff, changing the world from the command line. And it's cool. It's like, man, I wish I lived back then. I could do that. I would have changed the world. I'd be one of those names that everybody knows, And I think that's what Linux is to people. It's intentionally built to keep people from learning it. I mean, think about this for a second. If you want a text editor on Linux, how many options do you have? A command line text editor. Well, you got VI, and that was replaced with Vim, and then there's Nano, and what's the old one? Pico, I think, is one, or something like that. Like, there are so many text editors from the command line. And why is that? It's because every time someone's like, well, I like this tool, but it doesn't do everything the way I want it. So I'm going to create my own tool. And then they're like, it'd be really funny is if for the command switches, instead of sticking with some sort of standard that emulates everything that came before, so even if you're new to the program, you can just pick it up, I'm going to use all these obscure switches and letter combinations just because, it kind of reminds me of something. I'm going to use funny keywords, just as little inside jokes. And then you end up with an operating system that is a clusterfuck to run. It works incredibly well. It's generally very stable, very efficient, incredibly customizable, but it takes this incredibly high level of knowledge to really get into and to be able to work at it, in depth. And rather than people striving to overcome that and change it and to be easier to learn and easier to get in, to internalize, they keep it difficult because it's this sort of, as humans, we all want to have secret knowledge. It's a fascinating thing, actually, if you've ever studied cults or this, QAnon stuff, or even religion. It's this phenomenon where human beings love to feel that I personally have some knowledge that you don't have. It sets me apart from you. It makes me a little bit better than you. This secret knowledge that I have. It's a common aspect of all sort of subgroups, and we see it a lot in Linux. And it's the thing that I hate about Linux. Like there are definitely people who are trying to make Linux easier, but I remember like the first Linux desktop, back like 20 years ago, people were like, "Oh, this is it. This is the death of Windows. Linux is going to take over." But it hasn't. And the only reason it hasn't is because it's still so goddamn complicated. I started using Raspberry Pi recently, and there are so many things that I have to go to all these different files all over the system and type in these obscure commands. And then when I go to look up the man pages or try to get technical information about those commands, half the time the information, like there's no way you cannot find all the details. Like what was the command I was using recently? I can't remember what it was. Adjusting the audio settings. Like, you think that would be pretty easy to adjust the audio settings. It'd be pretty standardized by this point. No, it's this incredibly convoluted thing. You have to use all these keywords and stuff, and some work, some don't, and nobody can explain why you have to do it this way. I cannot find any documentation that explains why you need to do this command. And when you look at the man page, half of the commands aren't even listed in the man page. So it's like, that's what I hate about Linux. And this guy really encompasses it. Kind of triggered me a little bit. This idea like, oh, you want to learn Linux? Well, go down all the source code for the kernel and all of its components and build your entire system from scratch, after you hand solder your own x86 processor. It's like, come on, man. That's not, this isn't 1974. We're not building an 8082 as a hobby computer with lights and switches. Like these are real computers. We need to use them. Like we want to sit down and do work. When the work that you're accomplishing with your computer is making your computer run, you kind of miss the purpose of having a computer. Unless it's your hobby, in which case this is awesome. Enjoy your hobby. But in the real world, in the corporate world, in the, hey, I got to get a job world, this stuff just drives me nuts. Anyway, that's all I got to say about this stuff. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.